Every single time a Hearthstone expansion is released, we often get a lot of really good cards, some of them being legendaries that are meta defining, but sometimes we get legendaries that are just absolutely garbage. And I'm talking about the legendaries when you open up a pack and you hear the gnome go legendary, and it's just a feeling of just despair and sadness because that legendary is going to see virtually no play. But before we get into it, let me know what you think is the worst legendary minion released in Hearthstone. Starting off in the Witchwood is probably one of the worst things I've ever seen just in terms of a Hearthstone card. Dustfallen Aviana, a 5-mana 3/7 druid legendary. On each player's turn, the first card played costs 0 mana. I don't really understand the logic of this card at all, because this is just a straight downside from the turn you play it, because your opponent gets to use this effect before you. So why am I spending 5 mana to give my opponent an effect that they can use? On top of this, your opponent can actually use a card first for 0 mana and then use a different card to kill this immediately so that you don't even get to use the effect. This card was good for one thing and one thing only, which is giving you 400 dust from a pack. In the following expansion, the Boomsday Project, we arguably saw a legendary that was even worse than the previous one. Harbinger Celestia was a 4-mana 5/6 neutral legendary that had stealth. After your opponent plays a minion, become a copy of it. And the idea behind this card is very simple. You play it before you think that your opponent is going to play a really good minion like Ragnaros, and then you take their Ragnaros from them. But it doesn't actually work like that at all. See, the issue with this card is that you would have to be able to predict when your opponent is going to play a really good minion. But even then, even if you somehow are an absolute wizard at Hearthstone, your opponent can just play a different minion instead, making this card much more useless. And on top of this, are you really going to hold a card in your hand for the potential to get a really good minion from your opponent? Probably not. Also, against any form of aggro deck, this card is absolutely garbage. But this card did have one really good use that a lot of people did not notice, and that is helping you craft another legendary. Going all the way back to Whispers of the Old Gods, which introduced us to obviously the Old Gods, some really powerful legendaries. There are some legendaries in this expansion that, well, you know, weren't old gods. The best example of a legendary from that set that was the complete opposite of an old god was the Boogie Monster. The Boogie Monster was an 8-mana 6/7. Whenever this attacks and kills a minion, gain +2/+2. In Whispers of the Old Gods, the power level was much lower than it is now in current Hearthstone, but this legendary isn't the Boogie Monster. This legendary is a cute little rabbit because, well, this is garbage. Now, if you just compare this to Boulder Fist Ogre, which is a 6-mana 6/7, great cost for the stats, this card just looks atrocious. Guess the only reason this card is like this is just because maybe it could get a little out of hand and extremely snowbally, but the chances of that are so low that I don't know, maybe in playtesting it was broken. But I do know why this card is called the Boogie Monster, and that's when you open it in a pack and you see it, you actually get terrified. In the Grand Tournament, we were introduced into some really cool legendary minions, including Justicar Trueheart, which holds a special place in my heart. But we also got introduced to legendary minions, which I don't know why they made them. Acid Maw was a 7-mana 4/2 hunter legendary. Whenever another minion takes damage, destroy it. The only real reason I can see this card being made was for some kind of control variant of hunter where you use Acid Maw plus Unleash the Hounds to clear a full board. But here is the thing. Control Hunter doesn't really work ever, and on top of that, that's a 10-mana combo for a board clear, and when you compare that to something like Brawl, this card is absolutely garbage. The only really good application of this card is that you would hope that you would get it from Sneed so you can actually get yourself out of a very poor situation, because this card was not good enough to put into any Hearthstone deck ever. And don't tell me about your homebrew deck that you won one game with, it does not count. Also in the Grand Tournament, we were introduced to a really cool idea that just did not pan out the way that they probably wanted it to. Bolf Ram Ramshield was a 6 mana 3/9 neutral legendary. Whenever your hero takes damage, this minion takes it instead. The idea of this card is very simple. You play both Ramshield, now your hero can't die and you win the game because you're literally immortal. But that's not actually how it ended up working. See, they kind of forgot to put taunt on this card, so what would happen is that you would play this and then your opponent would just send all the damage face and then this thing would just die. So in theory, this card saved you 9 life, but it didn't really actually do anything other than just come on the board and just die. Even in some of the best expansions, we still got some really questionable legendaries. In Mean Streets of Gadgetzan, we were introduced to Madame Goya, a 6 mana 4/3 neutral legendary. Battlecry, choose a friendly minion, swap it with a minion in your deck. Now, this is a card that is extremely weird because not only do you have to put this in a deck that has probably a lot of big minions you want to cheat out, but you also have to put this in a deck where you're able to swap it out for something, and you're not going to swap a big minion for another big minion. And on top of this, if you top deck this card and you have no minion in play, this card is virtually useless. It will be a 6 mana 4/3. I don't really know why they made this card for Mean Streets of Gadgetzan, especially when you look at what the set was, but I have one good use for this that they should have done, which is to swap it for a different legendary when you open it in a pack. Do you ever see a Hearthstone card and ask yourself, why did they make this card? What was the purpose? And what did they think this card was going to be used for? Well, Temperis is a perfect example of that. A 7 mana 6/6 Priest Dragon legendary. Battlecry, your opponent takes 2 turns, then you take 2 turns. So not only does your opponent get to use the effect first, but they get to play minions and then those minions get to attack. But on top of that, they have 2 full turns to potentially just straight up kill you. Priest doesn't really have a great way to utilize this effect other than maybe like Inner Fire Divine Spirit at the time. But even then, it's just not super great. It's like if someone asked you, this is the best tasting apple in the world, but you have a 90% chance to die. Would you take that apple? A lot of you would probably say no. So for the last legendary in this video, I'm going to mention a legendary that I don't see a lot of people talk about when they consider the worst legendary ever printed in Hearthstone. And that card is Wilfred Fizzlebang, a 6 mana 4/4 Warlock legendary. Cards you draw from your hero power cost 0. So in theory, this card is an 8 mana 4/4, draw a card that costs 0. Now, this card could have a huge high roll potential, but on average, the card's not going to draw you something nearly good enough for the amount of tempo that you lost. And the chance that a 4/4 legendary with this effect is going to live more than 1 turn is the most unlikely scenario that you basically have to hope the 1 card you got from your hero power is going to win you the game. I'm sure I missed a bunch of legendaries that will be written in the comments, so let me know what you think is the worst legendary down below, and I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, I would appreciate a subscription. You look fantastic.